PBSI clients and friends, and for some of you, this may be your first exposure to PBSI. My name is Ray Cool. I'm CEO of PBSI Technology Solutions. I'll be joined today in our discussion by Janet Reed, our Director of Security Compliance Services. Janet has had many, many years of experience working with practices in the field and sees all kinds of actual practical application for HIPAA. And from the things we've learned over many years of working with hundreds of healthcare clients, today we will speak. So agenda, which mostly will be covered by Janet, we want to address the reality that we see is that so many practices, all of us are obligated under HIPAA to protect information. Everybody understands that. So in the world now where audits are increasing, penalties are increasing, hackers are increasing, the dangerous environment out there is pretty well understood, which I suppose is why you're attending this webinar, and it's why we're delivering this information. Our goal today is not to sell products and services, it's to inform. So we offer HIPAA security assessment and remediation in a number of areas, but our goal today, we want to make sure everybody has good information about the current environment. So how do we survive a HIPAA audit? Differences between breach and incident notification, what are the requirements? Key things and policies and procedures that we think that we see are required and we find frequently are missing. Key items in a security risk assessment, what are things that we see missed frequently? Issues about staff training, everybody knows it's important, but documenting the training that's done tends to be a common difficulty. And then finally, how do we know that our compliance is in shape? So that's our agenda today. Once again, thanks for joining. So many of you, thank you very much, have been clients and friends of PBSI for, in some cases, decades. Thank you. As CEO of PBSI, I'm blessed to know that the strength, the reason that those of you who are clients have continued to utilize our services is because the quality and depth of our staff. We're so fortunate to have so many people, including Janet Reed, especially Janet Reed, who've gained experience and are focused on helping clients. So our role is in technology and security. So why we're having this conversation is, I think, probably painfully obvious to everybody. PCs today are increasingly infected with malware that steals passwords and copies data. Keylogging and phishing attacks are constantly changing, and we find that there are many, many PCs out there where there's under the surface keylogging going on and the victim is not aware, leading to an environment where it's very difficult to know that we're safe unless there's some kind of monitoring going on. It's obvious we're protecting patient information and financial health of the practice. So this is not a game, of course. We all in the healthcare environment understand that. And so today we want to help increase the knowledge level related to security measures, risk assessment and compliance, and education. So to lead our discussion in this area, I am turning the ball over to my friend and colleague, Janet Reed, in one moment, when I make the right transfer. So Janet, I want to welcome you and look forward to the information that you will cover today.
Good afternoon. Can everyone see my screen? Ray, can you see my screen?
I do not. But that may be because I didn't transfer it correctly. How about that? Yes, Janet, pardon me. So welcome, okay. Janet.
Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Great. Sorry about that. Good afternoon. Thanks for attending. So today we're going to be discussing 5 components to the path of audit-worthy HIPAA compliance. Just to give you a little background on myself, I've spent 20 years here at PBSI, and over 50% of my time is spent training out in the medical offices. So today I just want to take the opportunity to share some of my experiences with you and help you become HIPAA compliant by giving you tools and tips so you know that you will pass an audit. And we all have fears of failing an audit or having a breach. So how do we eliminate fears? You have to have policies and procedures, period. No getting around it. It's required. And what about those vendors that have access to your data? Ask them for a business associate agreement. It is for your protection. If they breach your data and you don't have a signed agreement, then you will get the fine for noncompliance. You have to train your employees, not one time 5 years ago when they started, but every year. Last but most important, complete a risk assessment, one that will pass the audit. This is not a checkoff sheet. This is required document to find out what's lacking, what needs fixing in your medical practice. And auditors will ask to see this document and want to see what risk you're proactively working on. So we're going to start out by talking about policies and procedures. You know that old saying, if it's not written down, then it didn't happen. Your policies and procedures are your bedrock to compliance. I've worked with practices who have bought a book of policies and procedures online, but they never customize it to fit their own office policies, just sits on a shelf. If you don't customize them, then you've wasted your money and you are in violation of HIPAA. The most common violation found during a HIPAA audits were the lack of or outdated policies. What is the difference between a policy and a procedure? That seems like an easy enough question, but what does HIPAA define as the difference? Each policy defines an organization's approach and defines enforcement and consequences for the violations. Procedures describe how the organization is going to carry out that approach. You have to have step-by-step instructions that explain how to implement the policy. If you left your job tomorrow, would the person taking over know how to follow the written policy? Policies and procedures are a requirement. You have to follow a standard business form when creating your policies. If you already have a form that you're working with now, that's fine, but you want to follow HIPAA recommendations, and these are the things that need to be on your policy. And that is, they have to have a creation date and they have to have a modification date. You might want to write all these down. You need to have a purpose of the policy. That's to establish a goal for the policy. And then scope, what and who the expectations apply to. Any definition, so if you're using any terms or acronyms that wouldn't be known to the person reading that, then you have to have definitions. You have to have a policy statement. That's the intent of the policy. And then there's the procedure. That's the step-by-step procedure. That's a process to fulfill management's intent of how, when, where, why this policy exists, including what job functions are responsible, and then enforcement. What are the penalties if the procedures are not followed? Policies have to be modified to meet changing needs of your organization or any rule changes, and the changes must be documented. If you don't have policies in place now, then where do you start? So get online and look up the privacy and security rules, as these are the rules will list the policies you are required to have in place. The HIPAA privacy rule covers confidentiality of the PHI in all forms, and the security rule covers the mechanisms that we use to protect the privacy of our information. There is a lifespan to our policies, and that is until a procedure changes or the laws change. Any policy that was written and not updated since 2013 is considered non-compliant. But the Omnibus rule came out in 2013, and those policies need to reflect the changes. So these types of changes are going to catch the eye of an auditor, as well as a book of policies that have been purchased and not implemented, or policies that were downloaded off the internet and have some other practice name on them. I've seen all of those. It's not necessary to recreate the wheel. You can purchase policies and procedures, but what is needed is customized policies that will follow what HIPAA said about policies. And that is, policies establish measurable objectives and expectations for the workforce. They assign responsibility for decision making. They define enforcement and consequences for violations. And the procedures describe how organizations carry out that approach, setting forth explicit step-by-step instructions that implement the organization's policy. And you can't get that unless you customize policies. I'm showing you a graphic of the table of contents of the PBSI Customized Policy and Procedure Manual. And this is a 97-page manual that follows the policies and procedures required by HIPAA, the privacy, and the security rule. These policies are the guide to what is required on the security risk assessment, so they go hand in hand. Without the policies, you'd fail your security risk assessment because it's all about what policies you need to have in place and what mechanisms you need to have in place to secure your data. And the table of contents recaps all the policies that are covered in this manual. And it's not an employee handbook. This is not the same. This is your security and privacy manual. You need that in addition to an employee handbook. We also include required forms and logs. So picture a few of our logs, and then I actually have just a list of all the forms that are included with the manual. So an employee training log, they're going to ask for this at your audit. They're going to ask you for a log that shows the date of training, what the training program was, the employee name, and an employee signature. A good thing to do is if you're going to do a training program, then get a sign-up sheet, and everybody that's there, make sure that they sign up for it, that they sign on it. A business associate log. You need to have current business associate agreements. We just mentioned that. So, so many practices are unsure of who, or even if they have a business associate agreement with their vendors. You need to keep track of these and have the agreements and make sure that you have them all in place because they're protecting you in case of breach caused by the business associate. And then a security incident log. You need to write down every security incident and investigate it, and they're going to ask for that also. So you want to get a security policy manual that follows the HIPAA requirements. And why does the business associate compliance matter? Well, any company that you hire that has potential access to your data, that becomes associated liability for a breach. The privacy rule requires that a covered entity obtain assurance for the business associate, and that has to be in writing. So it's either a contract or a letter between you and the business associate, but you must have something in writing. A business associate breach would have a great impact on your practice from a regulatory basis. The agreement holds your business associate responsible to follow the same rules you have to follow to protect patient information. It's very important that you have this. A statement from HHS website states, OCR will be asking covered entities to identify their business associates. We encourage covered entities to prepare a list of each business associate with contact information so that they are able to respond to this request. So look for that. That was just on their website. So with all that said, I mean, why would you not ask for the business associate agreement? Sometimes the challenge is just knowing who they are, but HIPAA defines business associate as a person or entity that creates, receives, maintains, or transmits for a regulated healthcare function. So some examples of a business associate for you would be if you have a third-party billing company. They have access to your data. Maybe a CPA firm that you work that does your accounting. They have potential to have access to your data. An attorney whose legal services involve access. Your shredding vendor. A storage facility. If you have charts, old paper charts that are off-site, you need to have a business associate agreement with them. If you have outside medical transcriptionist, you need one with them. And a technology company like PBSI that provides IT services, you need to have a business associate agreement. So what is breach? Do you know if you've had a breach? So not every disclosure of PHI is a breach. Your organization will determine if you've had a breach or an incident. The rule says a violation of the privacy rule that doesn't constitute a reportable breach is an incidental disclosure. That's when patient information is disclosed to a person not involved in the patient's care or disclosed to other patients. Some examples of disclosures, incidental disclosures, would be your sign-in sheets that patients sign in when they come into your office. Maybe your medical assistant calling out the patient's name to come back from the waiting room. Have you been in a examination room and you can hear the person next door talking? That's considered incidental disclosures, not a breach. Maybe sometimes the patient will finish, the doctor will leave the room, and then they'll walk out and catch the doctor and start talking about their care in the hallway where other patients could hear. That's considered incidental disclosure. Maybe a telephone call to a patient might be overheard. All of those are considered incidental disclosures. They're not reportable. But then again, you need to talk to your staff and make sure that they're watching out for things that they're saying, and that they're closing the windows so that people can't hear if they're talking to a patient on the phone. We still need to be careful, but there are things that we need to do to conduct our day-to-day business, and they consider those incidental disclosures. So breach is described as acquisition, access, use of disclosure of unsecure protected health information in a manner not permitted by the privacy rule, which compromise the security or privacy of the protected health information. So some examples of breach would be a stolen computer or laptop, unless you have it encrypted or you can prove no PHI was present. Records stolen from a storage facility. That actually happened, and if you look at the OCR wall of shame, you'll actually see that there's a breach that happened out there where they did not have a business associate agreement and they were fined. Ransomware, lost or stolen charts, records sent to the wrong patient, or records sent without the patient's authorization. There are certain records that you have to have authorization from the patient to send, and the list goes on from there. And so who do you tell about a breach? It's important to know if you've had a breach and correctly analyze it, because you'll need to know the nature and the scope to communicate to the correct parties. So covered entities have 3 parties that they have to notify of a breach: the patients involved, the Department of Health and Human Services breach portal, and I've given you a link to the portal, but you can also just Google OCR Wall of Shame and it'll take you to the same place if you don't want to write that whole link down. And potentially the media. So when you have a breach, you always need to notify the affected patients and the Department of Health and Security Services, no exceptions. If over 500 individuals have been affected, you must alert the media. And so then what do you tell them? What do you tell your patients in a letter? So you have to properly comply with breach notification rules, and you have to communicate to the affected parties, and that's your patients. You need to tell them what happened, what kind of PHI was disclosed, what you're doing to investigate and mitigate future harm, and how the patients can contact you. And most of the time, if it's a large group of people, you're going to do that in the form of a letter. And so how long do you have to report a breach? A breach of 500 or more individuals must receive notifications without unreasonable delay and reported no later than 60 days following the discovery of a breach. Notifications of smaller breaches, those under fewer than 500 individuals, must be submitted to the Department of Health and Human Services at year end. So you have to make every effort possible to contact the individuals affected by the breach, the patients. Sometimes they move, letters come back. So OCR tells us that if the breach is affecting more than 500 residents of a state, you're required to provide notice to a prominent media outlet serving the state. So most likely that's a press release to media serving your affected area. And this is in addition to sending out the letters to the individuals. And so what can you do to reduce risk? And I don't think you're going to be surprised by the answers. You establish policies and procedures, and you train your employees regarding breach notification. Every employee should know who and how to report a possible breach. That would be to your privacy officer. So that would be your office manager, but somebody, or a doctor, someone in that office needs to be titled the privacy officer. Maybe you want to perform a mock breach to assess and identify if there are gaps in your policy. Maybe you want to engage a third party to come in and help you with that. So I took a look at the OCR breach portal for our area of Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky for 2017. And you can see that unauthorized access and disclosure was the #1 type of breach with a hacking IT incidents as #2. So when you get a chance, take a look at that OCR wall of shame, and you'll be shocked at the number of breaches that are reported monthly. Well, hackers are coming for your data, and I'm going to tell you why. So everybody thinks that hackers want our credit card and our bank data, but what they really want is our healthcare data. Data stolen from a bank, quickly becomes useless because once the breach is discovered, people change their passcodes. But data from the healthcare industry, which includes personal identification, medical histories, social security numbers, they can live a lifetime. And statistics show that 1 in 13 patients will experience medical identity theft to provider breaches over the next 5 years. 1 in 13 patients. Healthcare records contain the most valuable information, including social security numbers, addresses, and patient health histories. Sorry. I'll start that over. So social security numbers, home addresses, patient health histories, that's making them more valuable to hackers than other types of data. They sell that data for a premium on the black market, and hackers have big incentives to focus their attacks on the healthcare industry. So one of the most common attacks against our healthcare providers includes ransomware. That's where patient records are hacked and subsequently locked down until a ransom is paid, and that's typically in untraceable electronic currencies such as Bitcoin. So healthcare organizations they've been slow to educate employees about the dangers of cyber attacks. So you must focus on educating members of your medical and your administrative staff on hackers and cyber security. So all it takes is one person opening up an email attachment for hackers to gain access to your system. Educate your employees on how to detect and report suspicious email. It's crucial. Security is everybody's business. If you work with electronic devices, it's your responsibility. So you might get a little pushback or lack of enthusiasm from employees about HIPAA training, but you must remind them that training is required by HIPAA and it's key to being compliant. There's flexibility to HIPAA training, so make your training scalable to your audience. You don't have to get out the HIPAA rules and read them all to them. The goal is to protect the privacy and security of the information you've been entrusted with. So it should include the laws, but it should include your policies and procedures. Make sure that they know about the procedures in regard to protected health information, and make the training realistic to your practice. Give scenario situations where PHI is disclosed or where behavior is not acceptable, and do some role playing. There are 4 required elements of workforce training. First is universal application. So everyone in your practice is subject to HIPAA training. That is, not only just your staff, but that interact with patients, but everyone. So your billing department, it includes your doctors, all the medical staff. If you have any students coming in, most likely they've had HIPAA training. Check on that. Make sure that they come with HIPAA training. Any contracted employees or volunteers also have to have HIPAA training. Define PHI. Identify the elements of PHI so that everyone is aware of what that is. And you want to make sure that you include the minimum necessary rule. There's a lot of your staff that probably don't even know what that is. So make sure you go over that in your training. So what PHI do you normally disclose for a particular task? What PHI is appropriate to leave on a voicemail? Employees should only access the minimum information to do their job. And that's why HIPAA requires you to monitor and audit users to see what records they're going in and looking at. And then your EHR should be set up by job function and access set to reflect that job function. Employee access to PHI is authorized. That's why you have to give a login and password and monitor those logins and passwords. So create a security awareness program that includes reminders, protection from malicious software, training on logins, monitoring, and password management. You're required to train employees annually and send periodic reminders. There's no set time for the reminders. I would suggest doing that quarterly. You're required to document the training sessions with employees' names, date of training, name of the training, and like I mentioned, a sign-in sheet would work well for that. So here is an email that came from OCR back in July, and it says, train your workforce so they don't get caught by a fish. So in this email, OCR states that with the increase in interconnectivity, there's a 10% increase in security-related HIPAA violations or cybersecurity attacks. Training for your workforce is not only essential, but it's required by HIPAA security rule, stating implement a security awareness and training program for all your members of the workforce, including management. You must implement periodic security updates. An organization's training program should be ongoing, evolving process. So how often? They say biannual training and monthly security updates. Monthly or quarterly. They don't really give a time frame, but at least if you do it quarterly, you'll be compliant. Reminders to quickly communicate new and emerging cybersecurity information. And then again, document, document, document. Auditors are going to ask you for that. And that tells you right here, as required by the HIPAA rules. I'd like to share with you a couple of options that PBSI offers for staff training. So listed on the screen is an example of a training program that was designed with our partner, KnowBe4. This is a set of training sessions that we currently set up for a client, and this program offers video presentations that we send via email to each employee, and that could be their company or their personal email. The video presentations range in time for about 4 to 25 minutes and are selected based on current security rules and current security threats. Employees can watch them from home at their leisure. Employees are given a preset amount of time to watch the video. Most of the time it's either 15, maybe 30 days, depending on whatever you want set up for your office. And at the end of the campaign, then PBSI generates a report of the participation and our grade. Some of them have testing, and we send it to you. So as required by HIPAA, you have the documentation of the employee name, the name of the training material, and the date of the training. So it's managed by PBSI, no work on your part, trained, documented, done. Couldn't be easier. We also offer on-site HIPAA training. So a PBSI trainer will come to your office to train your employees of the HIPAA regulations, but most importantly on your policies and procedures with regards to PHI, customized just for your staff. We supply a customized privacy and security handbook for each employee, and having a live instructor that allows for interaction and questions makes it just a little bit more interesting. So think about maybe having a session with your during your staff meeting, or maybe you want to bring in lunch for the staff and have HIPAA training then, so you can get taking care of everybody on one day. The staff will take a test at the end of the session with 20 multiple choice questions. It takes about 15 or 20 minutes to complete, and then we mail you a certificate for each employee. So your security risk analysis is made up of two parts. It's the risk assessment, and it's the security of your IT infrastructure assessment. The most important requirement of the security rule is to complete the security risk assessment. The risk assessment gives us guidelines to find risk and vulnerability in our security and day-to-day procedures. In essence, it's a list of questions that help us to assess where we are vulnerable. So if you participated in meaningful use or you plan to participate in MIPS, The number one question on your attestation is, did you complete the risk assessment? So if you pass meaningful use, then you attested to the completion of the security risk assessment. So our goal is to produce a detailed report to close any of those compliance gaps. The security rule also states that you must secure your IT infrastructure. So you're required to have monitoring in place to make sure that you safeguard the integrity of your data. So are your software patches up to date on each computer or device? Do you have an update antivirus? Are your computers being scanned for viruses? Who's watching all of this? There's ways to automate this, and Ray's going to give a demonstration at the end to show you how you can protect your computers and scan. So the steps to completing your risk assessment, we're going to start by taking an inventory of all devices where electronic PHI is stored or has potential to be stored. And it's a good idea anyways to have this. Even if you're not doing your risk assessment, I would do this immediately, because you need a place where you have a listing of all of your inventory with all of your serial numbers. What if you have a fire? So get that written up and save that off-site someplace so that you at least have that if something happened. Where's ePHI stored? On your server, on your backups, laptops, tablets, anybody bringing devices from home, a desktop PC or fax machines, copiers, cell phones if they're texting, which they shouldn't be, dictaphones, X-ray machines, EKGs, software such as EHR, Word, or Excel, our email. We find a lot of PHI in email when we do scans. And then you'll examine the people and processes that have access to the PHI. So then that's when you'll get out your policy and procedure manual. The security rule will give you guidelines of what policies you need to have in place, and you'll probably find that you need to write and address many procedures that most likely are not currently happening right now at your office. Steps that assure that your data stays safe and keeps you from PHI breach. So we're always going to be focused on a goal of creating a culture of compliance, and just make that the theme of your office. Then look at your technology, who's remoting in, what is encrypted or should be, who's using your wireless access or text messaging. Contact your IT support team to help you with this section. So after you've done your research and gathered the necessary information, you need to document, train, implement the policies. What's the best plan for you? You can try it yourself. There's not a given format or a tool that is required to be used for the security risk assessment, but there's many out there. What is required is that you address all the safeguards set for the security rule. You can always try it yourself. There's downloadable tools available. You'll need to engage your IT company. There'll be questions that you typically wouldn't know the answer to. So do your research, understand the questions so that you can give the right answers. You might decide to add some outside expertise to complete or just to review your security risk assessment. So let me show you an example of one of the tools available. And this is a tool that we use at PBSI, as it's the tool recommended by ONC. So we start with the inventory preparation. So we're going to write down the asset type and where it's located and the serial number, and then we're going to answer whether or not it has ePHI on it. And then we have a series of questions. And for each one of those questions, it'll ask you, and we'll have a drop down and we'll answer it. So you've either addressed it, you've partially addressed it, or you've not addressed it. And then we'll go to the policies and the people and the processes. So in here, what it does is it gives you an example of a threat statement, a vulnerability threat statement. And then it gives an example of a recommended control measure. So then we enter what the existing control is, and is that existing control effective, not effective, or partially effective. And then we look at exposure. So if we didn't have a privacy officer, what would our exposure be? Would it be high, medium? And what is then we assess the risk, and we say, okay, so if this is what I'm answering as my control, what is the likelihood of the risk happening to me. So then you'll mark that as not likely, and then you'll mark we'll mark the impact of that risk for you. So then we'll do the same thing for technology, and at the very end, it'll come up with your high and medium risks, findings, and remediations. And this is what you're going to work off of. So anything that's higher than a low risk, then those are the things that you need to work on. This is the page that the auditor, when they come to visit, this is the page they're going to take a copy of and take back as part of your audit. So it's not like if you had a bunch of mediums on here or high risks. That's not what's going to fail you. What's going to fail you is that you're not working on them, because that's the whole idea of doing this, is to find the risks in your practice and then make sure that you're taking the steps. So even if you said this is something that we're going to do in 2018, at least you have addressed it and you are aware of it. So there are benefits of having a professional help you with a security risk assessment and your policy and procedure manual. So we do the research and documentation for you, and just getting a set of fresh eyes to look over how you're securing your data, how staff's handling it. You're busy, the job takes time and resources to complete. You want to reduce your risk and your fear of audits and fines, improve the quality of your procedures. Just sometimes it's just better for the professional to be the fall guy, for the professional to tell your staff that these are the rules that you have to follow. Sometimes it's just better if it comes from someone else. And again, if you've attested for meaningful use, please, please, please make sure that you have this risk assessment in place. I've helped many practices through audits, and trust me, you do not want to tell the doctors that you failed the audit, because that means the money that they've already spent is going to be taken back. I have a couple of documents too that are available that I wanted to show you, and they're available for us to send to you. The first is a security self-assessment checklist. And this is not a security risk assessment. This is a self-assessment. So this goes through questions of the things actually we talked about today, like, do you have policies? And then what do you do for your policies and the procedures? Have you documented it? What about for your network management? Do you have a firewall in place? Is your antivirus up to date? So this will kind of help you walk through this and see where you need to start at. The other is a security risk analysis of myths and facts, and this actually came from CMS. And this goes through questions that we've all had. The security risk analysis is optional for small providers. That's false. Everybody does it no matter what, if you're doing meaningful use. But it's part of the security rule also. So even if you're not doing meaningful use, you still have to do a security risk analysis. My EHR vendor took care of everything I need to do about security. That's false. You have to do that. They can help you with the answers, but you have to do it yourself. You have to make sure that the entire thing has been done. And we've heard that many, many, many times, that their EHR vendor or their IT vendor already did that. If they never called you and asked you any questions, there is no way they could have done a security risk analysis for you. Again, a checklist will suffice for the risk analysis requirement. That's false. So let me know if you'd like copies of these handouts, and we'd be happy to email them to you. Or even if you want to call us and have just a one-on-one discussion, I welcome that from you. So with permission from our client, I'd like to share with you an experience of a recent meaningful use audit at a client. So even though HIPAA said audits in 2017 would be desk audits, this audit was done on site, and it was done in December of 2017. The client received an email late November requesting an audit of meaningful use for 2014. So they're going back. They're not just doing the current years. And so they had a list of pre-screening questions. They requested a report of all the patients seen and their insurance package in the year of 2014. So we facilitated that for the client. And then they had a list of questions. So they asked for these documents to be uploaded on a secure portal that they gave to the client to use. So we got them the needed reports, and then we got everything together. We made sure that all of our policies and procedures were documented. We got our security risk assessment all together. We talked to the staff. We prepped them all in advance of the auditor coming. So the auditor came on site, and she went through every attestation question on that meaningful use attestation. So every one of them. And then she required print screens for any of the measures that didn't involve patient visits. That would be like your formulary was turned on, and everything had to have a date on the bottom of it. Like when you screen print it, it had to show the date was from 2014, and she was very particular about that. She looked at our policies and procedures. She looked at our risk assessment. On the risk assessment, she looked through the entire document, which turns out to be like 60 pages. And she went to the very last page, which was that remediation page, and she asked us to make a copy of that for her to take back. She also asked us for each one of the attestation questions that did have the numerators and the denominators. Well, that wasn't good enough. We had to print out a list, which was available through EHR. We had to print out a list of every one of those patients that were that we attested to, with each one of their visits, and whether or not they passed or they failed. So those were some pretty big reports, but we had to do that for every one of the measures that we put in a numerator and a denominator. And again, she reviewed our procedure and policy manual. She looked at training logs, and we had approximately she was there for approximately about 2 hours, and then we had some follow-ups in the next few days from her, and our client passed. And so that's why he allowed us he gave us a little statement on how happy he was that we came out and helped him. It was stressful, I can tell you. It's very stressful to be out there, but if you have your ducks in a row, you know you're going to pass, and it's a really nice feeling. You have to prepare in advance to have a successful audit. You need that security risk assessment, and again, without it, you automatically fail. You have to have an assignment of privacy officer with the job description, the security incident logs and security incident reports documentation, employee HIPAA training log. Each employee has to sign a sanction policy. These are the things that you learn when you get a policy and procedure manual. You can see the things that they have to have. So you have to tell them what their responsibilities are to HIPAA and to your office. Your policies and procedures manual, including all the aspects of HIPAA, privacy and security rules. Your security risk assessments is your guide to the needed policies, and auditors are going to talk to your staff. So start documenting now. The security rule also states that you have a contingency plan for disasters and emergencies. So from what I've observed, most of us have waited to do this or have not done it. I found a statement from Dan Irwin, and he's a security advisor for Dow Chemical Company. You can see that up at the top of the screen, and thought that was a pretty good statement. The best way to get management excited about a disaster plan is to burn down the building across the street. Because I know your struggle. I know that it's hard sometimes to make the doctors or make the administrators understand how important this is, but it's so important. So I have lists of what's included. I know it's a lot of text up on there. I just wanted to make everyone aware that that PBSI does provide assistance in writing and testing. Those are all required. You have to have the plan, and you have to test the plan for an emergency disaster recovery plan. So we'd love to talk to you about that. So minimize the risk of a HIPAA security audit. Document your progress. Create your HIPAA security action log. That's that remediation page that I was talking to. Make sure that if you're doing that by hand, that you have all of these written out and you've assigned them to somebody. Make an assignment to it. Put a date on it. That's what they're looking for. Make sure you have that breach log, and make sure the staff know. I can't say that enough. You know, you need to involve your staff and let them be aware of what causes a breach, and then that way they'll be more careful. If they don't know, how can they not breach something? So we have to train. Document corrective actions taken for any type of violation or a breach, and secure all your EPHI. The single most important item, once you learn, you have to address. Encrypted data is excluded from breach. So if it was me, I'd have BitLocker encryption on every single laptop. And hard passwords are good passwords. Laptop encryption, wireless security, firewall rules, monitored antivirus. Security is a culture, and you must be able to prove that culture. So to recap just the topics that we discussed today, I have this from the Security Standards for Administrative Safeguards, and just kind of goes over what we talked about today and things that you have kind of highlighted, what we've talked about and what's required. And so the rules are either they're required, which have an R next to them, or they're addressable. So required is just that. You're required as per the to meet that measure as per the specification. But addressable gives you 3 options. So you can implement the rule as per the specification. You can implement an alternative to accomplish the same purpose and document why you could not meet the specified measure. Or you do not implement at all, and then you document why it is not reasonable and appropriate to implement an alternative safeguard. And then you say your prayers. So that's all I have today. Just thank you for your attention. I look forward to hearing from you with questions or a need for help within your organization. And Ray's going to show us a demonstration of online monitoring as required by HIPAA.
Thank you very much, Janet. Appreciate the information. So we have, if I can execute my technology well here, to make myself the presenter again. Okay, so I'm not going to do a detailed demonstration. We're out of time. It's 1 o'clock. I want to do one thing very quickly just to identify, and for those of you who are covered by PBSI security, virtually everything I'm going to show you now, with one exception, and that is many of you don't have data breach analysis scanning going on, but all the other things, if you're covered by PBSI security, you don't have to pay attention to the next 1 minute. But in the next 1 minute, I'm looking at the monitoring dashboard that PBSI has for all clients. So we have a bunch of clients, and in this case, I've limited just to PBSI. I'm only exposing our data. And what I'm looking at is workstations at PBSI, and I'm going to limit this to just workstations with the name Ray in them. And very quickly, the idea is there's a monitoring piece of software installed on each PC. So I'm selecting my own PC, and what happens is that instead of Ray needing to pay attention to what's going on his PC or anybody else inside of the organization needing to pay attention, there's an online dashboard that presents at PBSI where all PCs of all clients are sending data every 1 hour to this online dashboard and reporting the status of all kinds of security items. So on the bottom, once I've selected, and a technician would do this, Ray never has to go to his own PC and look at this. On the bottom, the technician can see the status of failed logins, a security issue, can see the status of vulnerability scan that's done every night, really important so that you know that key security things are being checked, can see the status of patch management. So on Ray's PC, there's one patch that's missing. Now this would automatically be approved, but a technician can approve this manually. So patches, we have them set to update twice a week for every client. So now there could be failed and where a technician would get involved, but we make sure that the security is up to date, that the antivirus status is is up to date and then there's nothing unusual going on. And the idea of the dashboard is that key alerts get reported up to the top level, so nobody has to go and look at Raise PC ever. Instead, PCs with security issues or patches that are out of date or vulnerability scans that displayed information that needs attention, they're attended to by a single staff, and we proactively reach out and take care of things on a client's behalf. It's not unusual that for a given client with, say, 10 or 15 PCs, that we might have 100 different actions that we take that month, and the client, in most cases, is never aware. We see the patch was out of date, we fix the patch, and so forth. So without any more detail, just know that this monitoring that identifies if something were going wrong, it would be seen from afar and addressed. And where you get contacted is where the ransomware occurs or something happens that we know needs attention, or your disk drive fills up. So those are things that we can tell you in advance. So there's monitoring in place, and it's a really good thing, whether PBSI does it or somebody does it on your behalf, really good thing. So for a client, we do this, including antivirus and all the services involved, $6 a month per PC. It's about a third of the price of what typically is charged in the marketplace. So I want to thank you for your attention, Janet, and for all the information that you share. It's obvious, and I know this from experience, you spend a lot of time in clients' offices, you're learning all the time. To call and ask questions or involved in discussion, we're happy to help in any area. Free information, call anytime. Janet's not the only person, but certainly would be the starting point. If you want to engage in having a risk assessment done, just depends on how much energy is involved and where the current status, policies and procedures, template customization, HIPAA training, ongoing training, data breach scanning, disaster plan preparedness, and audit assistance. These are all things that we offer. So again, the purpose today is not and has not been to sell services. I hope that everybody in attendance has learned something, as I know I have, and I want to thank each of you, especially who are long-term PBSI clients. We care about your security, we care about your compliance, and we thank you for your partnership. So we're finished.